I don't want to be an influencer, but I believe that you are an influencer. How's that?
I don't know about that, buddy. Okay. So are we on? Are we live?
We're
Am I talking
recording,
yet?
but I'm going to cut all this crap
Yeah.
out, or I might do something fun with it.
No, man.
So
Some
you
double or
ready?
some bloopers, right? Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
the
ready. Let's
blooper
go.
reel.
The
We could
bloopers.
have fun with a blooper reel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the role of the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you stories and wisdom from some of the best CMOs in healthcare today. The leaders on this show will share with you insights about the role and the responsibilities that come with the title of Chief Medical Officer. Today, our guest is Dr. Mark Olszyk, the Chief Medical Officer at Carroll Hospital in Maryland. Dr. Olszyk grew up in central New Jersey and earned his medical degree at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, and trained in emergency medicine at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego. In addition to being the CMO at Carroll Hospital, Mark has the distinct privilege of serving as the vice chair for the Maryland Board of Physicians. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, my friend. It's a great honor to be here on the Fire Chief Podcast.
Do you remember when we first spoke, when we first met each other, actually, and you shared with me that you were authoring a book about chief medical officers?
I do remember that. I was introduced to you through the auspices of Nancy Collins at AAPL. I had an idea for a book. I think everybody at some point in their life says, I should write a book, based on your experiences. And actually, I was sort of mentoring a new chief medical officer in our system. And at some point, I must have given him some enumerated list informally of tips that I had discovered at great personal, sacrifice and embarrassment over the years. And 6 months later, he asked for me to resend the list, and I actually didn't have it or forgot about it. And I thought, boy,
must have been some robust list, Mark.
Yeah, it must have been. I mean, it was something I put aside, never, could find again. But I thought, gee, you know what? If he's asking for some sort of orientation advice package, there's probably other CMOs out there.
Absolutely.
Or auditioning or inaugural or aspirational CMOs or even physician leaders who would benefit from a book. And I reached out to my network of friends and colleagues, some of whom are CMOs or were CMOs or were in similar roles or were other executives in healthcare who worked with CMOs. And I asked them to write a chapter, and they were very enthusiastic. Huge variety of voices, different ages, demographics, regions throughout the country, different experiences. And that's really what I wanted. And when I reached out to AAPL to publish the book, Nancy said, boy, I got a guy in Florida. He's fantastic. You should talk to him. And, lo and behold, I had no idea I was going to stand in the shadow of greatness. And then,
well, that must have been some CMO, because I'm sure it wasn't me.
No, it was you. And then, just like a year later,
there it is.
There it is.
Read the title for the listeners.
Right. The Chief Medical Officer's Essential Guidebook. And it's, you can see it's chock full of wonderful stories, and you don't have to read it cover to cover sequentially. You can pick the chapter that speaks to you in a particular situation and read through that. But yeah, there's a lot of different authors, voices, perspectives in there. So
do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember when we met in Chicago when you were at the book stand and promoting the book? Do you remember what you said to me the very first time we actually met face to face in real life?
I think I do. I thought you'd be a lot larger.
That is actually exactly what you said. and I took
Yeah.
it as a compliment and an insult at the same
No, no.
time.
My impression, having only spoken to you via, Zoom or telephone or email, was that you were, yeah, a commanding presence, and I expected to see someone who is, a linebacker, 6'3",
Well, I
and
appreciate that. Again, it was a
in my mind,
compliment.
that's who you always are, though.
For those who don't see us on the screen, for our listeners, Mark is a bit bigger than I am, and he is proportionally fit, whereas I'm a small to average man in our way of thinking. So anyway, this show is clearly a 100% byproduct of all those conversations that you and I have had, both in writing the book and since writing the book, and about building a community for chief medical officers. And I want to take the moment to formally acknowledge your support along the way, and to say thank you and for listening to me and for advising me. I think we got something really good going here
Mhm.
amongst chief medical officers. So thank you again.
Thank you.
So, you and I, we know each other pretty well, but our listeners do not. Could you tell the audience a little bit about how you found yourself arriving at the position of chief medical officer?
I was pretty good at emergency medicine, and being in your 20s, I think it's a very attractive field because you don't have to take your work home with you when you leave the ER. You're done. The patients aren't going to call you, and sometimes you have weekends off. Sometimes you have a stretch of days without going to work. I think once you get into your 40s and beyond, the estimation is exactly the inverse of that. It's like, oh my God, I have to work some weekends and holidays and nights, and now I have a family. The flexibility isn't there. So I remember being in the Navy, and I had taken over. I think I was the youngest department head in the Navy because the guy who preceded me absolutely hated administration. And so I was 9 months out of residency before I became a department head of emergency medicine. But I remember one of our civilian contractors, first name was Bruce. He came up to me, and he was in his mid-50s. He was filling in as a locums or per diem guy on a shift. He said, "Hey, listen, young guy, take it from me. By the time you're my age, do not be full-time in clinical medicine. You're going to miss your kids' birthdays. You're going to be burned out. You're going to be tired. Go into administration, at least part-time, or research, or academics or something." And to me, it was like, Marley's ghost visiting me, on Christmas Eve. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take your advice. But I also had, a penchant for administration. And I actually did enjoy putting together a budget and coming up with strategy and going to meetings at the time. So I ran the emergency department in the Navy. I went out to the civilian world, private sector, for about a year before the VA called me. They were building a brand new emergency department. They didn't know anything about emergency medicine. They didn't have one at the time. And they were going to be taking care of Navy beneficiaries, meaning active duty, spouses, dependents, including children. And they really wanted somebody from that world come over and build and run the ED. So I had carte blanche to hire all the staff, hire the nursing director, meet with the contractors, the vendors, help design the ED. So I was like a kid in a candy shop. And I probably made every possible mistake hiring, interviewing, presenting that I possibly could. And hopefully I've learned from those mistakes. And, that was a very seminal time. I still reflect back to that almost 20 years on. And so in that role, I kind of, think I succeeded, or at least people thought I was successful enough to promote. And then I wound up becoming deputy chief of staff when I moved my family back to the East Coast in Maryland, and then wound up as a senior executive in the VHA Veterans Hospital Administration. And then about a little over a decade ago, I decided to return to the private sector and interviewed for the job as chief medical officer. And I've been here for a little bit over 11 years. So
That's
yeah.
It's very, very impressive. I've got a couple of questions that have
Okay.
come up with that. So we'll use the Marley's ghost analogy, and the holidays are always a time for reflection. If
Mm-hmm.
you if you were to, would you offer that same advice
Mm.
to a young physician early in their career, uh, especially in emergency medicine, that they might want to think about another phase in their arc or of their career or their trajectory? Would you offer that advice? Would you modify that advice?
I don't know that I would offer that advice quite so actively as it was given to me, because I think everybody's journey is different. I will say, I will repeat what I've heard, that emergency medicine tends to be a younger person's game. We know it is difficult to switch shifts, nocturnal, diurnal. I have very close friends. My Navy roommate, same age as me, mid 50s, said, "Hey, I just did my last night shift," and he was thrilled. So you can't continue, in your sixth and seventh decade to have the same schedule you did, you know, 20 years before. It's just very difficult. Um, I think you can continue to practice, but I noticed in our own emergency department, by the time the providers, hit around 50 years old, they're looking for something else. And I don't know that we've really, as an endeavor, medicine in general, really think about what happens as physicians gain wisdom, but also are more seasoned. I think many specialties you can continue, especially psychiatry, internal medicine. We even have a couple of surgeons that are in their 80s, not going to the OR, but assisting or working in wound care. So I don't know. I've never been asked for that advice, and I'm very cautious to give unsolicited advice. But I do think everyone should, think about where they're going to be in 20 years, because it does come up sooner than you would believe. But I
Yeah,
would I would say for everybody, look at your own proclivities, your interests, your strengths, and if you do feel possessed to go into academics or administration, or just dedicate 10 or 20% of your time to billing, coding, finance, that sort of thing. I think the opportunities are certainly there.
yeah, I would agree. There's plenty of opportunity for non-clinical work or different types of clinical work as we
Right.
progress. I think our generation, particularly the generation before us, they could envision a lifetime of practice. It was
Mhm.
the world was set up that way. And I'm not talking about bureaucracy or regulation.
Right.
It was the knowledge of medicine and the practice of medicine could be self-sustaining for a really, really long time. I think we're all experiencing the rapid acceleration of technology and innovation and the regulatory demands that we're working differently now than we thought we would have if you and I had done a time capsule exercise back in medical school and said,
Right. Right.
hey, what do we think it'll feel and look like in our, late 50s, early 60s, whether we would think about retiring or not, but what would our daily life look
Mhm.
like? And I
Right.
think you might agree that, we have more science, knowledge, tests, technology. So what we do with our patients is extraordinarily different than what we did in the 80s. So the actual practice is very different. And I do think you run out of the capacity and the steam to do it at the same pace.
Right.
So I
Right.
would concur you can change your pace, you can change your approach and the way that your day unfolds, either clinically or non-clinically. So what did you do to prepare? So you said you made a lot of mistakes at the VA, and that was an incredible way to learn. And we all know as parents, if you let your kids make a few silly mistakes, hopefully not too many dumb mistakes and no life-changing mistakes, but then they
Mhm.
learn. So what would
Mhm.
you advise some younger physicians about preparing to become a chief medical officer, and what you might say about mistakes they make or you might have made?
So I've actually given a number of talks on leadership. I don't confine myself strictly to medicine. I think leadership is a quality, is a discipline that you can learn from other fields. In fact, I think you become a more accomplished and resourceful leader if you're informed by experiences outside of medicine. So I was a Cub master and a Scout master for about 5, 6 years. And I would say if you can run a meeting and capture the attention of 60, 10 to 12-year-olds for an hour, you've learned a lot. But I tell people, if you want to be a leader, and I think there's some apocryphal story about Robert Frost, the poet, he had asked to come to a college and give a lecture on writing. He came up on the stage and said, "What are you doing here? Go out and write." So if you want to be a leader, reading a book or taking a lecture or being in a class, that's okay. But if you really want to be a leader, go out and lead. And people say, "Well, where can I get the experience?" Like, oh my God, everybody, every organization in your life is begging for leaders, whether it is Scouts or your house of worship or the local PTA, or even at the hospital. There's always some fundraiser. There's always some campaign or something. So if you want to be a leader, you have to learn to lead. And the first question I ask in any leadership class I deliver, say, what is leadership? And I get all kinds of things about transactional, translational, about the corner office, about commanding respect. And I say, no, it's really, really simple. A leader is someone who gets people to do what he or she wants them to do. And a lot of people look at me aghast, like, oh my God, like that seems dictatorial and mind controlling. I'm like, no. It might be in their best interest. Like if there's a fire and you say, hey, follow me, I know the way out. Like, that's leadership, and you're getting people to do what you want them to do. And it's for everyone's, best interest. Now, a good leader, a leader who can survive, who has the loyalty and respect of the folks that they're leading, needs to be mindful of their abilities, train them, groom them for success, positively reinforce. So you can be a dictatorial, authoritarian leader, but your life expectancy as a leader is very, very short. So you have to, groom leaders to become new leaders. So I think the success is when leaders you've trained train other leaders, down the line. So what I would tell a younger person, yes, absolutely go out and lead. One lesson I've learned very slowly over the years. I remember Tom Meyer. He is, I think, the medical director of the NFL. I think, a big name in emergency medicine. I went to one of his lectures in the American College Emergency Physicians Leaders Academy about 15, 20 years ago. He said something, never underestimate the power of boss. And that is, when you're the boss, you might not know it. And I forget this all the time. Your words are very meaningful. So when you praise somebody, they feel it 2 or 3 times as much, and they take it to heart much more than when, a colleague, a peer, or somebody else does that. Similarly, if you criticize them, they feel it 10 times as much. And they're always, everyone's always watching you, whether you know it or not. So I would say be very thoughtful and careful in your communications and your style. 10 years ago, I would try to stand out a little bit more. I try to, dazzle people with my historical knowledge or reference or brilliance. I wasn't trying to show off. I was just trying to, in my mind, act the part. But I did it, I was coloring outside the lines a little bit. I wasn't reading my audience as much. And no matter who is around you, when you're up on that, that pedestal, they're always looking for you to make a mistake, have a little gravy on your tie, or, have that toilet paper on the heel of your shoe.
And then
Yeah.
Marley's ghosts of Christmas past and
Yeah.
present future will come to visit you and
They will.
remind you
They
of
will.
those things. Yes.
Yeah. So, so I would say be a leader, be conscious of your, the impressions you're making. Always, always, always seek feedback. And it's tough. You ask for feedback and you don't always get it. It's very hard to receive it. But it's important to get that as much, like, how am I doing? And I would say finally, seek some sort of a confidant, because it's so hard to keep all of your experiences to yourself. It can be a very lonely job. You're at the intersection of the medical staff and the administration. Um, and sometimes you just want to vent or do a little reality testing. So find some really safe mentor, maybe somebody outside the organization who can give you honest feedback, because everybody needs to share their stories. Otherwise, we become solipsistic and, go down our own rabbit holes. So somebody who can speak truth to you, you can vent your frustration, some of your observations, and who can tell you, take a deep breath, step back, take a pause. You're in a safe space now.
Yeah.
But be very, very careful about doing that with anybody, at work.
Yeah. Well, super sage advice. Clearly, you've been highly experienced, been in the role for almost a dozen years. I think the wisdom that you just imparted to our audience is priceless. And what I heard you say is it's about leadership more than the technical. You will learn the technical as you go, but learning how to lead, being a leader of influence, learning how to motivate people to accomplish the goals, and have folks that you can trust and rely on to both help either mentor you or give you advice, or for you to run something by them or confide in them to help your true north of leadership get you to the right place. So
Yeah.
really, really special things that you just shared. You can often separate people into simple categories. Folks are analytical, aggressive, or diplomatic. That's one triad that I've heard. And you could do the same with physician archetypes. I would be curious to know what you think your coworkers and colleagues would describe, and what they would say is Mark Olszyk more like Dr. William Osler, Dr. Michael DeBakey, or Dr. Anthony Fauci. Which category do you think they would say if we could survey them?
So, does somebody, resemble a Fauci unit or an Osler unit, or a debate unit, or whomever else? And funny story about Fauci, man, with just the wheel of fortune, right? I remember being in medical school, and this was in the mid 90s, early 90s, when New York City, had the HIV crisis, tuberculosis crisis. I mean, I remember being a third year medical student on service at St. Luke's, just north of Central Park, going into Harlem.
Yep.
And one night, I think the resident admitted onto our service 16 patients. Everybody was positive for HIV, and about half had multi-drug resistant TB. So that was our mindset back then. And then we had a guest lecturer, Dr. Fauci, come on up, and it was standing room only, and that was 25 more years ago. And so what kind of executive am I aspiring to be? What kind of leader? What kind of, father? What kind of human being? And I hope it's something better and better all the time. So the physician, executive, CMO I want to be is the best version of Mark Olszyk. And I'll take all of my experiences and all of the feedback, and all of my successes and all of my failures, and try to, and my mentors and what they say, and try to project that into the future. But I wouldn't compare myself to any of the giants, whether it's Scheinbart, Osler, Fauci. I'm just, trying to be the best version of myself, and we'll see how it goes.
Again, fantastic advice for our listeners. I'm not going to let you off the hook, though. I will come back. When we do this show again, we're going to tag team, and we'll pick on another CMO.
All right.
And we'll ask them what they think their coworkers would describe them as. I know your coworkers would not describe you as Dr. Scheinbart because they don't know me. And if they knew me, they certainly would not compare the two of us. I am way below your scale of excellence. But I love what.
Okay. So I feel like I haven't given you an answer. So I won't, I won't say they would compare me to, any of those, uh, individuals, but I hope they would say that they find me curious, approachable, fair, that I try to stay informed. One thing I love about being a CMO is the same thing I loved about emergency medicine, is that I feel like I'm a ambassador at large. I can go anywhere in the hospital. One of my best friends is the chief of pathology, he's a pathologist. He's in, the basement, and he's very comfortable with his microscope in the lab. But until he became chief or president of the medical staff, he had never been up to the behavioral health ward or, into pediatrics. But those are, haunts I visit on a regular basis. I feel perfectly comfortable and am welcome going into the OR, into the cancer center, into the ED. So I'm like a minister plenipotentiary, which I loved about emergency medicine. You get to see everything: pediatrics, surgery, trauma, medicine, critical care, poisonings, lightning strikes, same thing as CMO. Not only all the whole clinical arc, but also I get to, go to the CFO's office or into the president's office or meet with the foundation or the board of directors or out in the community. So that's why I think it's the best job in medicine. So hopefully people will say about me, gee, I think he really enjoys his job. He's trying to do the best he can. He's an effective communicator. He does his research. He's very approachable, open door policy. I would like to think I stay humble. They wouldn't say that, but internally, I try to stay humble. So those are some of the attributes I hope they would apply. Um,
And those,
Others, maybe not.
yeah, of course. A
Yeah,
third of people will never like you in your role, and a third of
right.
people will love you. And then the rest, the messy middle, as they call it,
Yeah.
are the people you work with every day. And I think those attributes are all about leadership. And if
Yeah.
your people around you see you in that authentic way that you describe,
Mhm.
then you will be a very strong leader and more of a leader than a boss. And that's a great position to have. I think that our listeners hopefully are enjoying the show and the things that you journeyed through to become a chief medical officer. But one of the highlights of this program is meant to share the difficult moments that we go through. You and I both were in the chief medical officer role during the pandemic, and that there's been a
Mm.
lot of discussion by other folks on that. So we're not going to go there. But what I do want you to share with folks is what was the hardest challenge or the biggest fire that you had to fight aside from the pandemic? Now, maybe a piece of it, but not the pandemic. And how did you put it out? And what were some of the leadership tools that you used to fight that fire? And I really want to hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of challenges over the years. Some probably um, aren't really the stuff of a good story. There's little one-off crises here and there. But I will invoke a very seminal experience, and it's safe to talk about because it happened a while ago. And it happened when I was working in the VA. So I had a portfolio, different divisions I was overseeing. And one day I was in an executive meeting and the boss said, "Hey, our comp and pen timeline, our the amount of time it takes to process a compensation and pension exam is way out of line with the rest of the country. We're falling behind. I'm getting calls from Washington. We're under the gun. You're in charge of this. What are you doing about it? How are you going to fix this?" And my answer was, "What's comp and pen?" I didn't even know I was in charge of that. Right. So just a real brief education. So the Veterans Affairs is divided into three big parts. There's the cemeteries, and memorials. There's the really big one, Veterans Health Administration. That's all of the 160 plus hospitals, clinics throughout the country. And then there's Veterans Benefits, which is responsible for, adjudicating claims and then mailing checks for compensation, for injuries sustained while on duty, and pension. And so veterans could apply, either immediately or literally decades and decades on, and say, hey, I think I deserve some sort of a compensation. And they would have to go from the VBA to the VHA and be examined. And it wasn't a diagnostic interview. It was more of an assessment of as likely as not, or more likely than not, or unlikely that this was sustained and during active duty. But it meant a lot. It meant money, and we had basically a 30-day target to turn things around. And this was really, really important because it was now cross agency, and we got a lot of heat, and that just trickled right down. And it was not an acceptable answer for me to say, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? It fell under me. I was not aware. So heat, fire, a lot was being expected. So what I did was, not knowing anything about it, I went to go learn about it. So I drove out to the facility. It was one of our branch clinics that housed the entire comp and pen division. And I started asking questions. I'm like, hey, how do we make this faster? And lo and behold, um, the people actually doing the job had all of the answers. There was no one big answer, but there was a lady who had been doing, the administrative work, and she had been there for 15, 20 years, and she knew it inside and out. And she said, boy, if I just had a fax machine in my office, I could cut off a couple of days, because she was possessed of a body habitus that would not lend itself to facile locomotion. And so she would stack them up until the very end of the day, and then she would fax things. And she said, if I could just do it as they come in, we could eliminate it. And then someone said, if they would entrust us with our own postage stamps, we wouldn't have to put it into the, inter-campus mail and wait for the mail room to sort it. If we could mail these things out directly, we would save 4 days. And it was little things like that. If you could authorize this overtime. And I didn't know if I had the authority to do these things, so I just did them anyway. And then I went out there frequently and I celebrated their successes. Small victories, little pizza parties. And then we began to show some sort of progress, some sort of momentum. And this fire, which I don't know if it was something that would have, threatened my career, because here as junior executive, I'm responsible for a division I didn't know about. Is that some sort of negligence on my part? So I'm immediately feeling responsible and feeling, in the crosshairs. I didn't go to some seminar. I didn't, read a book or a chapter how to fix comp and pen. I actually went to the people that were doing the job. And, within a couple of months, we were below 30, then below 20 days turnaround. Sometimes we were in the single digits. So we led the country. Within about 6 months to a year, we were, the very best, and people were asking how we did it. And I made clear that I had nothing to do with it. It was the people actually doing the job. And that informs me to this day. Everybody has consultants come in, or, try to take advice from a different institution, or what are they doing? And I find if you just ask the people who are actually doing the job, they generally have the answers. So, trust your own people first. You can bring in a very priced consultant, but if you say, hey, where's the nearest bathroom? They can't tell you that. So their practical knowledge is near zero. They might have a lot of, experience or best practices to apply. But again, to assume that one hospital is like another, is a little bit, dangerous. We can learn from other people, but I'd say more importantly, let's learn from our own people. So, that's a fire that was quickly put out. And, if you're looking for a really happy ending, someone said, hey, good job, here's your next project. So, there wasn't like, some great accolade, and that's not why we did it. But, in the process, we did increase the morale of the staff. We improved the process for our clients, our customers, our patients, the veterans. And we just, it felt good to do, and it was really validating. So, that was, I wrote about that in the book too. That was, I think one of my proudest moments, just believing in the wisdom and the strength and the integrity of our team.
It's a wonderful story, and the leadership lesson there is so well articulated that the fire you're a lone firefighter in front of a burning house, meaning the comp and pen. So
Mhm.
what do? You go recruit firefighters from the fire station down the road and say, how are we going to put this blaze out? Well, I need a fax machine. I need stamps. Like, I need
Right,
water. I need a hose. I need a truck.
right.
I need a pump. And that is just incredibly insightful. And I think that that's the point of talking as chief medical officers. You don't have to be a subject matter expert. There are people that exist that know the problems and they know the solutions. You just have to identify. So that's a great story. What aside from the obvious of burnout, and if that's your choice, so be it. What do you think the biggest fire in healthcare right now? I mean,
Um,
what's the fire or a
yeah.
fire that we are all experiencing right now?
I think that there is a well recognized, at least amongst the medical community, secular trend over the last generation of physicians losing esteem, respect. You know,
You think a chief medical officer is in a position to do about this sort of disconnection that you're describing, the demoralization and disengagement? I see it as a separation of
yeah,
where
yeah.
physicians had a material say in matters and they have less of a say and they're feeling
Mhm.
that. So what does a CMO do about that?
No, there's a lot of things you can do. First of all, you have to find the people who are still interested and encourage them. And I've encouraged them to, become service chiefs, department chairs, serve on the MEC. Um, a lot of other people want to get involved, but maybe not that much right now. They might have, young children, other obligations. So we'll create some sort of a role. Like you can attend the quality committee for 1 hour every other month. Kind of bring them in because workplace or job satisfaction has what, four pillars. One is agency/autonomy. You want to have some control over your daily agenda, your work. If And I used to, in summers in college, work on an assembly line, and I move boxes from one conveyor belt to another. And after doing that for hours one day, I looked at the clock and like 15 minutes had gone by. So it was horrible. So the more control you have, the more, the more, I don't know, human you feel, the more accomplished. So I try to, make known, hey, listen, you're putting in this effort. Look what you've done. So be very liberal, very generous with praise, and let people look under the hood. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're focusing on this metric. And then some of the softer stuff as well. So you say, hey, let's celebrate this. Let's like we had the medical staff apply their dues fund, to establishing a little gym in the hospital to work toward wellness. And whenever medical staff suggests something, whether it's be able to open four tabs on the EMR at the same time, and we're still, trying to convince IT to let us do that. But, again, the people that are doing the job tend to have the answers that will make their lives more meaningful. If you can take that and champion that, even if you're not successful and prevailing in every case, I think if they see you as, their advocate, um, it feels better. Like somebody is listening, somebody is advancing, their suggestions. So there's that, and then just trying to I don't know, integrate, familiarize, the medical staff with other, divisions in the hospital, doing crosswalks, trying to have multidisciplinary committees, and then just being a cheerleader, doing the Gembo walks, again, be very liberal with your praise and your recognition.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would surmise that at least when I was in the role, in my experience, and it sounds like you share it, sometimes the doctors just need to be heard and seen and valued for what they are. And that's something a chief medical officer can particularly do, maybe more so than some of our non-clinical partners. And then they feel a bit validated in a world that is rapidly evolving. And that's enough to make them maybe stay engaged a little bit longer or pick something new. So I would agree. So listen, we're getting close to time. I think it's clear to our audience that being a chief medical officer is no small task, and it takes a lot of preparation. I think your leadership lessons are excellent, and some of it always feels like a trial by fire. There are mistakes and there are learned lessons. My old boss always told me that it is like a career in firefighting. You start by going to the firefighting school, and you train and you drill and you train and you drill until you're ready to put out a fire, and you put on the uniform, and then you're called a fireman or a firewoman. And then one day, perhaps you find yourself being called squad leader or captain of the house, and then perhaps you become the fire chief. My boss always told me you cannot be a fire chief without first becoming a firefighter. I would think, would you agree with any of that, Mark?
I would add to that. I was a firefighter in high school. I was an EMT, but an EMT also automatically belonged to the fire department, and depending on the call, I would suit up one way or another. But I would say the most important job of the fire chief is not responding to the fires, but preventing the fires. So if you could have everybody put in, smoke detectors, check the batteries every 6 months, learn not to smoke in bed, because it's much, much easier to prevent the fire than it is to put it out. Because even when you put it out, you're left with a mess. So if you're a really good fire chief, you're going to look at your staff and at your healthcare system and say, where are the exposed wires? What are the things that can be flashpoints? Because if I put in a little bit of effort right now, I can prevent, some conflagration. Maybe not next year, maybe in 5 years. And that makes my job easier and allows me and others to allocate our resources to something else that maybe we didn't see or couldn't prevent.
Absolutely brilliant. And you just earned yourself a ticket back to the show. So well done. It was a real pleasure having you on the show, Mark. You have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the CMO. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO? Want to be on the show? Email me at leescheinbart@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can listen to the podcast on Apple, and you can also watch the videos of our shows on YouTube. Our show's website is thefirechief.podbean.com. I love talking with chief medical officers from all over the United States, so please connect with me, leave your reviews and your comments, and share this with your colleagues. And in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.
And the Fire Chief podcast merchandise is available on Google. Act now, you get a free bobblehead with every purchase.
I'm going to have you as my chief of merch, my merch chief.
I want the Scheinbart inaugural bobblehead.